My Neighbor is an Alpha Landlord, written by Short Story Queen. Chapter 1. Nocturnal Noise Complaints. Declan's point of view. The attic tenant arrived late, long after the street had settled into its usual quiet, the kind of silence that meant the pack was watching. Not because they were nosy, because that silence was hard-won, earned, maintained, and she shattered it within 5 minutes. Her car door slammed with a reckless sort of hope. I could hear her boots scuffing the pavement, the scraping sound of overpacked luggage bumping up the porch stairs. I didn't move from my spot in the kitchen, just stood there beside the coffee machine, waiting for the inevitable. The attic wasn't supposed to be rented. I kept it off market for a reason. But when the town council hinted that a human might stumble across it and ask questions if it sat empty too long, I listed it out of spite. Cheap. Quiet. Short lease. And she booked it within an hour. Of course, she was smaller than I expected, her curls wild and her steps louder than anyone should be at this hour. Through the lodge window, I watched her try to wedge a suitcase through the narrow stairwell. I didn't go out to help. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't trust myself to speak to her just yet. What kind of person moves in at midnight? Torrin stirred. My wolf was already uneasy. By the time she figured out the key box and let herself in, I'd mentally composed the first fine. Technically, she hadn't broken a rule, but curfew was curfew. The pack didn't care that she was new. When she dropped something heavy directly over the beams of my bedroom, I took a long breath through my nose and grabbed a notepad.
Tessa's point of view. The lodge smelled like cedar and judgment. I knew it the second I stepped in. Everything creaked, including my ankles. The floorboards groaned like they resented my existence. The hallway lights flickered twice, then gave up entirely. Still, I'd had worse. The attic was up 3.5 flights of stairs and apparently had no insulation whatsoever. But it was mine for the next 3 months. It came furnished, which meant a sagging twin bed, a table shaped like a wheel, and a mirror with enough smudges to double as a haunted painting. I didn't mind. I'd survived my ex's gluten-free phase. I could survive a spooky attic. The landlord hadn't introduced himself. I only had a name, Declan Wolfe, which sounded like something a romance novel would make up after a bottle of wine. I imagined a skinny retiree in flannel, probably half-deaf and obsessed with air filters. Maybe I'd only ever see him on rent day. Wrong. When I woke up the next morning, there was an envelope outside my door. Neat handwriting, no return address. Inside, a note that read, "Noise complaint, 11:47 p.m., heavy footsteps, dropped items, and vocal exclamations. $25 fine, cash preferred." I read it twice. Blinked. Then muttered, "What kind of haunted Airbnb?" My second thought was, he must be joking. My third, he absolutely isn't. I crumpled the paper and tossed it across the room. It hit the radiator and fell with a sad little flop. I could feel the building watching me. Or maybe it was just bad wiring. Either way, something about this place didn't want me here.
Declan's point of view, she didn't pay the fine, and I didn't expect her to, but I left the envelope anyway. It wasn't about the money. The envelope was a warning. She was waking up the pack's instincts just by existing. I needed her to understand how thin the peace was here, without actually telling her what was going on. She wandered into town around noon. I watched her from the window as she headed down the sidewalk like she'd been born here. Barely noticed the street cameras, the neighbors who stepped back a little too quickly, the soundless way the birds avoided the trees. She was smiling at strangers, waving at dogs. No one waved back. Mrs. Klein from 2B came up to my porch and hissed. She whistled. She what? She whistled on the porch, Declan. She's either brave or brainless. Are we letting just anyone move in now? She's temporary. She's loud. So are you. The old woman narrowed her eyes. If your wolf wasn't such a good listener, I'd bake you into one of my pies. Torrin rumbled inside me, half amused. When I got back upstairs that evening, her attic window was open. A tiny speaker played soft jazz. She was singing, just under her breath, but it carried. She had no idea the woods could hear her.
Tessa's point of view. The second note came with a sticky tab on the door. Second offense, 10:06 p.m., jazz, vocals, whistling, $40. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't tell if this man was for real. I hadn't even met him. He just issued citations like he was the neighborhood's Moody Hall monitor. Still, there was something weirdly satisfying about irritating him, like poking a bear through a very polite fence. I scrawled back a note. Does this count as emotional rent, or is this just how you flirt? I didn't expect a reply, but a few hours later, someone knocked. Slow, loud, measured. I opened the attic door and looked down the stairs. And there he was. Declan Wolfe was not a flannel-wearing retiree. He was built like a linebacker and looked like he hadn't smiled since the Bush administration. His gray eyes didn't blink much. He held a wrench in one hand, like it was part of his body. "You left your trash bag half open," he said flatly. "That's not illegal?" "There are rules here." "Yeah, I've noticed." We stared at each other for an awkward beat too long. I wasn't sure what unsettled me more, his complete lack of expression or the way my skin prickled when he looked directly at me. Not like a man, but like something older, something measuring. His gaze flicked to my sweater. I realized I was still holding a spoon from dinner. He nodded at it. "And keep that silverware inside." Then he walked away. No goodbye, no explanation, just disappeared down the stairs. I stood there for a long time, spoon in hand, wondering how much weirder this could get, and why, despite the passive-aggressive fines, the ghost radiator, and the very probable wolves in the woods, why I suddenly didn't want to leave.
Chapter 2. Fines and Lines. Declan's point of view. By the end of the week, I'd written 4 fines, 2 written warnings, and a strongly worded suggestion that she purchase felt pads for her furniture. None of it worked. Tessa Blythe moved like a human hurricane, drifting through the lodge with the grace of a dropped broom. Every time she breathed too loud or rearranged the haunted rocking chair in the attic, I heard it. The house heard it. The wolves on the street heard it. And yet she continued living like there were no rules in place. No unspoken laws that kept this town together and intact. As if her chaos belonged here. I caught her dancing in the hallway once, barefoot and humming, headphones in, utterly oblivious to the fact that Mrs. Klein was practically foaming at the mouth 2 floors down. I'd been on my way to the boiler room, wrench in hand, when she twirled out of the laundry nook like something from a music video filmed on a very tight budget. She didn't see me. Just smiled at the cracked walls as if they were part of some private joke. I stood there, stuck between mild disbelief and something else. Something quieter and harder to name. Torrin, of course, noticed. "She's loud," I told him. "She's alive," he replied, and which wasn't helpful. That night she triggered the porch light 5 times, took her trash out past curfew, and left a half-eaten sandwich on the railing. I had to circle the entire perimeter to make sure nothing had caught the scent. I left her a new fine in a manila envelope. Improper disposal of potential meat product, $15, plus a sarcastic post-it about raccoons. When I passed by the attic on the way back in, I paused. Light spilled out from the gap under her door. I could hear her laugh. Soft, relaxed, like it had been a good day. I had no reason to care if she'd had a good day. I told myself that twice.
Tessa's point of view. He fined me for a sandwich. That was the moment I realized I might actually be living beneath a sentient rulebook disguised as a man. There wasn't a single interaction I'd had with Declan Wolfe that didn't involve him holding a wrench, an invoice, or a look like I'd just scuffed his personal sanctum with muddy shoes. And yet, somewhere between the suspiciously quiet neighbors and the growing collection of passive-aggressive envelopes on my fridge, I started to feel something almost like entertainment. Because while the sandwich fine was ridiculous, the Post-it note stuck to the outside of the envelope read, "This isn't a zoo." In smaller letters underneath, it added, "Also, not a buffet. Don't feed the forest." I couldn't tell if it was a joke or a threat. Either way, it made me snort into my tea. The attic was colder than advertised, but the draft wasn't enough to chase me out. I'd layered 2 blankets beneath my mattress and one above, and the radiator wheezed like it was trying its best. There was something oddly comforting about it all. The creaks in the night, the wind that never quite left the windows, the feeling that the house had lived through things. It felt older than the town itself, more secretive. What didn't make sense was the landlord. Declan didn't seem like someone who'd choose to live among cobwebs and weird plumbing. He didn't even flinch when the power blinked out mid-afternoon or when the pipes whined. He just appeared when something broke, usually before I'd had a chance to report it. And somehow, his timing was always perfect enough to be annoying, like he had a sixth sense for inconvenience. Or for me. I didn't know much about him, aside from the obvious. He liked order, he hated noise, and he watched people like he was waiting for them to mess up. He'd never smiled at me, never even looked amused. But there was something different in the way he lingered near the stairs, or paused outside the door, just long enough to make me feel watched, but not unsafe. The weirdest part? I didn't mind. Not in a normal way, not in a flirt with your landlord way. God, no. But in a quiet, curious way. The kind of interest you develop in strange birds or people who only buy one item at the grocery store. I'd started paying attention, not because he asked me to follow the rules, but because I wanted to figure out why someone that unreadable had eyes that tracked the woods more often than the tenants.
Declan's point of view. She rearranged her furniture again, this time at midnight. I knew because the attic groaned like it was reliving trauma. I wrote another note, but I didn't deliver it. She wasn't trying to be difficult. She was just trying to belong somewhere, and she had no idea how many invisible fences she was tripping. She still didn't know about the pack, about the reason we kept curfews and dimmed lights and never left food out. She walked around like a candle in a blackout, bright and unguarded, and I hated that part of me wanted to let her. She hung plants in the window, little green things with silly names written on popsicle sticks. I caught myself standing outside one night, pretending to examine the lodge's gutter system while she talked to her cactus. She said, "Don't judge me." And then, "He definitely judges me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He's probably a vampire, or an accountant." I left a post-it on her next find that read neither. She didn't leave another sandwich out.
Tessa's point of view. I found myself waiting for the finds. I shouldn't have. They were petty and unnecessary, and a few of them were definitely made up. But each one was a puzzle, half warning, half communication. And Declan never spoke unless something broke. That was his pattern. Tools, silence, finds. And yet, each envelope felt like a breadcrumb, something real in a town that otherwise refused to speak to me. The locals were polite, but quiet. They didn't ask questions, didn't answer many either. I caught them looking at me the way you'd watch a raccoon try to open a latch. Not malicious, just wary, like they knew something I didn't. I started to suspect I'd rented more than an attic. I'd walked into the middle of some closed circle story, and no one planned to tell me the plot. Except maybe him. Once, I brushed his arm by accident when I passed him in the stairwell. Just a brush, a flicker of contact. But it was like touching a live wire that didn't spark, just hummed. He didn't say anything. didn't even flinch. But his gaze snapped to mine like he was reading a language I didn't know I spoke. I smiled, mostly out of instinct. He didn't smile back, but he didn't look away either. Later that night, I found another note. Furniture dragged at 11:03 p.m. Noise complaint, $10. Consider coasters. He'd drawn a little sketch of a table leg next to it, badly. I pinned it to the fridge, right beside the sandwich citation. It was my favorite one so far.
Chapter 3. The Basement Incident. Declan's Point of View. It started with a drip. That's how these things always begin. Quiet, rhythmic, persistent, like a clock counting down to a mess. I heard it while I was in the middle of fixing the second-floor radiator that had the temper of an old man, and the noises to match. One moment the pipes were grumbling as usual. The next there was that new sound. Wet, deliberate, impossible to ignore. The boiler room had flooded before. Old buildings held grudges and rusted in silence until they couldn't anymore. But this time, the water wasn't trickling politely. It was gushing with purpose, a sheet of cold rising over the basement floor faster than I could cuss about it. The pipe had burst behind the tank, which meant tight corners, half-blind repair work, and one of those long nights where nothing ever fits back together the way it should. I was knee-deep in freezing water when I heard the scream. It wasn't a scream of pain, not even real panic. It was surprise and disgust. The kind of sound someone makes when they step into something they definitely didn't expect to be wet. The attic girl. Of course, I turned my head just in time to see her flailing down the stairs, one boot missing, and hair wild, soaked up to her knees. She froze when she saw me, as if uncertain whether to be relieved or more horrified. "You have a pool," she said, voice breathless. "You should advertise it more." She tried for a joke, but her arms were stiff and I could see the way her breath caught when the water touched higher. She wasn't built for this. Neither was the attic, for that matter. And the longer I stood there, the more furious I was at myself for not catching the leak sooner. I tossed her a dry towel I'd meant to use for my own hands. She stared at it, then at me, and then, of all things, laughed. Not politely, not delicately. Just full, ridiculous amusement that echoed off the pipes like we were in a comedy sketch gone wrong. I didn't laugh back, but I didn't find her either.
Tessa's point of view. If someone had told me I'd end up hip-deep in freezing lodge water before breakfast, I would have stayed in bed, or at least brought both boots. It started with a funny smell coming through the floorboards, followed by an ominous gurgle, and then the unmistakable sound of rushing water beneath my floor. I assumed it was a ghost. I grabbed a flashlight and crept down like I was auditioning for the world's worst horror movie. Instead, I found Declan, soaked to the thighs, holding a wrench like it had offended him personally. His shirt clung to him in a way that made me immediately question my life choices. No one should look that good while ankle-deep in plumbing failure. It was rude. The man had muscles that did things when he moved. His expression, as always, was somewhere between focused and faintly annoyed with the existence of everything not attached to a valve. I'd wanted to help, or at least offer a second pair of hands. What I managed instead was stepping directly onto a submerged toolbox, slipping and catching myself on a pipe that hissed back at me. He didn't laugh. But he didn't yell either. He just muttered something about water pressure and motioned for me to stay near the wall, which I did, mostly because my pride had just drowned somewhere near the drain. We worked in awkward silence. He fixed. I handed him tools and tried not to look like I was freezing. I asked him questions, mostly to fill the silence. How old was the boiler? What kind of maintenance the place needed? Whether the entire plumbing system was haunted or just selectively vengeful. He answered without elaboration. But every once in a while, I caught him glancing at me, like he was trying to measure something that didn't fit on a wrench. After what felt like an hour, he finally stepped back and announced it was under control. Water still sloshed around us like a shallow swamp, but the gushing had stopped. A victory, even if my feet were turning into popsicles. He told me to go upstairs and warm up. I stayed put. Not because I wanted to annoy him, though that was a bonus, but because I was starting to enjoy the way his voice sounded when it wasn't wrapped in irritation. When it dropped low and quiet, more gravel than grumble. Also, I was afraid if I left the room too fast, I might slip and die. Dignity was a delicate thing.
Declan's point of view. She stayed longer than she needed to. I could have told her to go, but the basement was already flooded, and I wasn't about to carry her out. Besides, there was something about her presence that didn't agitate the space the way others did. Even wet and shivering, she didn't seem afraid of the building. Of me. That was new. She kept handing me tools like she knew what they were. Once she passed me a wrench before I asked, and I felt Torrin stir again, faintly impressed. I ignored him. Eventually, I walked her back up the stairs. Her sock left a trail. I didn't comment on it. She looked back once over her shoulder and said, "You don't talk much, do you?" I shrugged. "You ever try it?" I didn't answer, but when she slipped on the last step and I caught her elbow without thinking, she didn't pull away, just blinked at me like she wasn't sure if I'd done it on purpose. I hadn't. My body moved faster than my mind, faster than Torrin, faster than the rules I'd made for myself about boundaries and tenants and unnecessary connection. Her elbow was sharp beneath my grip. Her skin was warm. Too warm for someone who'd just climbed out of a basement pool. I let go. She walked up the rest of the stairs without speaking. I watched her go, still holding the wrench.
Tessa's point of view. I should have said thank you. I didn't. Something about the way he caught me, just that one brief moment of unexpected contact, scrambled my brain. Not romantically, at least not exactly, but like being touched by something that wasn't meant to touch anyone. He felt solid, steady. He smelled like cold metal and pine bark, and I wanted to ask if he was always like that, or if the house made him that way. Back in the attic, I peeled off wet socks and stared at the ceiling. The pipes above me didn't make a sound that night. No drips, no creaks. I left a note under his door the next morning, just a post-it with a single word. Thanks. No fine came that day, not even a warning. Instead, when I passed the fridge later, I found a small roll of felt furniture pads taped to an envelope. Inside was a note that read, "You were right about the radiator. It's haunted."
Chapter 4. Curfew Breaker.
Tessa's point of view. I didn't mean to break curfew. In fact, I didn't even know there was a curfew. It started with an empty fridge and a craving for something warm and greasy. I'd been working on my freelance edits all day, trapped in the attic with nothing but tea bags, peanut butter, and a growing awareness that I was slowly becoming one of those weird people who talk to their houseplants for stimulation. I needed to get out, just for a minute, just far enough to hear a voice that wasn't mine, or Declan's grunted replies to whatever pipe was misbehaving that day. It was just past 9 when I threw on a jacket and crept down the creaky stairs, careful to avoid the step that squeaked like a guilty toddler. The street outside was too quiet, the kind of quiet that felt not peaceful, but paused, like something was waiting to resume the second I stopped moving. Fog clung low to the pavement. The lodge sat behind me like a big, brooding presence. I kept walking. There was a diner 2 blocks away. I'd passed it a few times, always closed, always suspiciously empty during hours that should have been busy. Tonight, it was open. No cars out front, no music playing, just the flickering neon sign that buzzed faintly above the door. The way it pulsed made my stomach tense, like it was warning me in Morse code. I pushed through the door anyway, because hunger is louder than instinct. Inside, it was warm and old, with cracked booths and a counter that smelled like burnt coffee and cleaning fluid. A waitress glanced up, blinked slowly, then disappeared into the back without a word. I waited at the counter, drumming my fingers, watching the steam twist above the coffee maker, like it was trying to spell something out. That's when I noticed him. A man in the corner booth, alone, face mostly shadow. He didn't look up, didn't drink the coffee in front of him, just sat, hands too still, like someone trying not to be noticed and failing at it. Something about him buzzed at the edges of my nerves. I turned back to the counter, suddenly very aware of the stillness around me. No music, no clatter, no hum of kitchen noise. The waitress hadn't returned. My wolf, quiet for years, barely a whisper, moved. It wasn't a voice exactly, more like the sensation of breath brushing the inside of my mind, alert and unfamiliar. I froze, confused and suddenly cold despite the heat. Then I heard the bell over the diner door ring again.
Declan's point of view. I'd known she was gone the moment the porch light flicked on. The pack didn't need to say anything. No mind-link alarm, no howling. Just a sharp pull in my gut, the sensation that something had shifted in the perimeter I worked so hard to keep balanced. I stepped out onto the front steps, looked at the empty street, and didn't waste time trying to reason with it. She'd gone out alone at night. I should have been angry. And I was. But the stronger emotion rising beneath it was something closer to dread. The rules existed for a reason. The town tolerated outsiders because we made it clear they stayed out of certain things. She was too new to know what she was stepping into, too stubborn to ask. I tracked her scent easily. Fresh pine, faint vanilla, something citrus beneath it like shampoo that never quite washed out. It led me straight to the diner. Inside, she sat at the counter, still in her jacket, legs crossed, head tilted slightly like she knew something wasn't quite right. Her posture was casual. Her eyes were not. I scanned the booths. Saw him. Low-ranking rogue. No pack. I recognized the posture, the way his shoulders hunched just slightly inward like he was fighting the urge to bristle. He hadn't moved on her yet. Probably hadn't decided whether she was prey or trouble. She didn't know the difference. I stepped through the door quietly. The bell overhead chimed. Her head snapped toward me. Relief flashed in her face, fast and unguarded. I didn't let myself respond to it. Just walked past her like I was here for coffee, leaned against the counter, and gave the rogue a long, slow look. He stood. Too quickly. Good, he knew better. He didn't speak. Didn't challenge. Just slunk out the back door with his pride intact and his tail tucked metaphorically between his legs. I followed him with my eyes until the scent cleared, then turned to her. "You need to leave," I said, low. Not sharp. Just flat enough to carry weight. She blinked once, then narrowed her eyes like she was trying to decide if she was in trouble or not. "Are you always this charming or just on Thursdays?" It wasn't the time for her usual sarcasm, but the way her voice trembled at the edges told me she'd felt it, even if she didn't understand what it was. Outside, the fog had thickened. I walked ahead of her, silent, hearing every footstep she made behind me like it was amplified. She was too trusting, too unaware. And it wasn't just dangerous for her, it was dangerous for me.
Tessa's point of view. He didn't speak again until we were back on the lodge steps. The whole walk home, I kept expecting a lecture, or at least another fine. Instead, he stayed silent, a shadow one step ahead, shoulders tense like the fog itself was something he was holding back with sheer presence. When he opened the front door, he didn't gesture or wait for me to go in. He just walked through, like the house already knew which of us it listened to. In the hallway, I paused. "What just happened?" I asked, not because I thought he'd tell me, but because I needed to hear him say something. Anything. He looked at me then. Really looked. Not like a landlord. Not like a guy about to write me up for being 5 minutes late to curfew. It was a stare that pinned me to the floor. "You went out," he said simply, "and something saw you." I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to demand clarity, but some part of me, the part I hadn't listened to in years, told me to let it go. Back in the attic, I closed the window and drew the curtains, suddenly aware of how exposed it felt to sleep under glass. The air in the room had changed. Not colder, just heavier. I lay awake for hours, listening to the old pipes, wondering what kind of things prowled past the edge of this street, and how many of them wore human skin.
Declan's point of view. I didn't patrol that night. I stayed near the stairs instead, wrench still in hand, eyes on the front door. The pack wouldn't come here. Not tonight. They understood what her scent outside the lodge meant, and they'd keep their distance, for now. But her wolf had stirred. I'd seen it in the way she paused before entering the diner, the brief hesitation like her senses caught something before her mind could name it. I shouldn't care, she wasn't mine, she was temporary, human in all the ways that mattered. And yet, when I stood outside her attic door an hour later, hearing nothing but stillness inside, I knew what Torin already did. She's not going to stay temporary. Chapter 5. Moonlight maintenance and
Tessa's point of view. The radiator died during the first hard frost of the season. One moment it was sputtering like an old man with a cough. The next, it went silent and refused to come back to life no matter how many times I kicked it, threatened it, or whispered apologies while wrapped in 3 sweaters. By midnight, the attic was a walk-in freezer with better lighting. I could see my breath. The condensation froze on the inside of the windows. Even the plants looked offended. I debated lighting something on fire, not as a solution, just to feel like I had options. But instead, I stomped down the stairs like a woman with frostbite and pride. I wasn't planning to wake Declan. I wasn't even sure he slept. But I figured he'd want to know before my toes turned black, and I had to sue him for emotional trauma and possible amputation. He answered the knock faster than anyone should at midnight. No pause, no sleepy eyes. Just the door opening to reveal him shirtless, barefoot, and holding a wrench like I'd interrupted something sacred. I looked away too fast to be casual. "It's freezing," I said, words escaping in clouds. The radiator gave up. I think it's staging a silent protest. He blinked once, slowly, then stepped aside. "Downstairs is warm," he said. I should have said no. I meant to. But then the wind howled through the attic stairwell like it was answering a dare, and I stepped inside his apartment before I could change my mind.
Declan's point of view. She looked ridiculous, half drowned in blankets, 2 pairs of socks, nose pink from cold, hair frizzing out in every direction like she'd lost a battle with static. And yet somehow, she still managed to walk into the room like the house owed her an apology. It probably did. I'd been working on the boiler again, shirt off, sleeves rolled, wrench in hand. Not because I needed the look, but because the heat made it unbearable to wear anything thicker than resolve. She stepped in and immediately started pretending not to notice. The avoidance was so deliberate, it became its own kind of acknowledgement. I threw a second blanket over the couch and handed her a mug I'd just poured. She sniffed it before drinking, like I was the type to poison tenants for sport. Then she made a face and said, "Why does this taste like bark and responsibility? It's herbal. It tastes like consequences." She didn't stop drinking, and the power flickered once, a half-hearted threat, then gave up completely. The lights went out, leaving only the low orange glow of the fireplace and the steady, quiet hum of the house settling around us. She didn't speak for a while, just curled into the corner of the couch like a cat, too proud to admit it liked being indoors. "You really don't talk unless something breaks, do you?" she asked eventually. I didn't answer. Partly because she wasn't wrong, but mostly because I was trying not to stare at the way her expression softened in firelight. Most people lost their shape in shadow. She gained clarity. Every line of her face became more vivid. Every glance, more readable. She pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them, and looked at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle I hadn't meant to become.
Tessa's point of view. I couldn't believe I was in Declan Wolfe's actual apartment. The man lived like an organized cryptid. Everything was in its place, warm and stark, and exactly how you'd imagine someone who spent more time fixing things than speaking. There were spare tools hanging like art on the wall, a stack of books near the fireplace, manuals, not novels, a worn blanket on the armchair that looked like it had seen more years than I had. And yet there was something lived in beneath the order. A chipped mug, a single photograph turned face down on the mantel, a coat hanging by the door that didn't belong to anyone else. I watched him move, economical and silent, setting the kettle back on the stove like he'd done it 1,000 times in the dark. He wasn't awkward. He wasn't gruff, either. Not really. Just quiet in a way that made you lean forward to hear the unspoken parts. It made me wonder how long it had been since he'd had someone to talk to who didn't want something from him, or fear him. He glanced at me then, catching me watching, and I pretended to adjust the blanket like that had been the plan all along. We didn't say much after that, just sat in the glow of the fire, sharing the space like it had been carved out for exactly this kind of silence. It should have been uncomfortable. It wasn't. I started to doze, not intentionally, just slowly drifting. The kind of sleep that sneaks up on you in safe places.
Declan's point of view. She fell asleep on my couch. Just curled into herself without fanfare or hesitation, like her body had decided the room was warm enough to let go. Her breath slowed. Her hand slipped from her lap to the cushion. She didn't snore. She twitched once, a soft reflex, and then stilled completely. I sat across from her, finishing my tea, pretending not to watch. Torrin was quiet but aware. He'd been circling her scent in my mind all evening like something familiar he couldn't place. Not possessive. Not yet. Just drawn. She didn't smell like a threat, she didn't move like one either. But something inside her was shifting. I could feel it. A low hum beneath her skin. A wolf not yet woken but stirring, like the proximity to pack was starting to reach her on a level she couldn't name. She didn't belong here. And yet the house hadn't rejected her. The street hadn't either. Even the pack, as wary as they were, hadn't called for her removal. I should have woken her, sent her back upstairs once the power stabilized, but I didn't. I let her sleep just this once.
Tessa's point of view. When I woke up, the fire was low. The blanket was tucked tighter around my shoulders, and he wasn't on the couch. For a split second, I wondered if I'd dreamed it. The cold attic, the herbal tea, the warmth of his presence in the same room. Then I looked to the armchair near the fireplace. He was asleep, slouched in the chair like he'd sat down just to rest and forgotten to get up again. One arm hung loose over the side, his head tipped slightly back, mouth barely open. He looked human, finally, fallible, tired in the kind of way you don't get from lack of sleep, but from carrying something heavy for too long. I watched him for a while, not because I was curious, but because something in me, something old and not entirely human, wanted to remember the way he looked when no one was watching. And that scared me more than the dark.
Chapter 6. The Pack Watches. Declan's point of view. The pack didn't speak aloud when they had concerns, they watched. It started with the usual small-town signals. Mrs. Klein lingering a little too long by the mailbox. pretending to rearrange her meat delivery while her eyes kept flicking toward the attic window. Gage, my beta, stopped showing up for poker night but managed to walk his mutt past the lodge 3 times in a single evening. And Denny, the mailman who normally delivered with all the grace of a man actively avoiding work, suddenly had a perfectly timed question about zoning laws, spoken while standing a little too close to the front steps. They weren't subtle, they weren't meant to be. Tessa had drawn attention. I should have seen it coming after the diner. After the night she went walking like she couldn't feel the weight of the town's rules pressing in around her. The moment her wolf stirred, even faintly, the street noticed. The pack always noticed. What worried me wasn't that they were watching her. What worried me was that she hadn't left. She should have. After everything, the notes, the silence, the curfew, the unspoken rules curling under her every step like fishing line, she should have packed her bags and gone looking for a place with central heating and 0 territorial tensions. Instead, she'd started humming again, quietly, just beneath her breath as she watered her plants or reorganized her shelves with the kind of logic that defied all structural integrity. She didn't act like someone waiting for permission to stay. She acted like someone who had already decided she belonged. And I didn't know what to do with that.
Tessa's point of view. I knew something was off when I got 3 unsolicited pies in a single day. One arrived on the front steps from Mrs. Klein, wrapped in cling film and something that smelled like regret. Another was left on the banister outside the laundry nook. No note, just a pie, like a very specific bribe. The third came directly from Denny, who looked like he hadn't slept since 2012, and handed it over with a twitchy half-smile. "They're just being polite," I told myself, standing in the kitchen with a knife and a half-eaten slice of meat pie I didn't remember agreeing to eat. Small-town charm? Maybe this is what hospitality looks like when you're outnumbered. But it didn't feel like hospitality. It felt like surveillance dressed as neighborliness. Everywhere I went, someone was watching. Not dramatically, not openly, but with the quiet attentiveness of people trying to determine what kind of creature they were housing on their street. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Their questions came shaped like compliments. It was polite paranoia. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on anything else. The radiator had come back to life. Sort of. It sputtered and moaned like an ancient creature being dragged back into service, but at least it emitted heat now. Declan had fixed it the morning after I fell asleep in his apartment, without speaking a word about it. No lecture, no fines, just the occasional glance in my direction that lasted a fraction too long. He was changing too. Little things. He stopped knocking like he was here to repossess something. He stopped leaving notes and started speaking. Short sentences, but words all the same. Sometimes I caught him standing at the base of the stairs, not moving, not calling up, just listening. And once, when I passed him in the hallway and offered a casual, off-handed joke about ghost squirrels in the attic, he'd actually smiled. Not a full smile, barely a flicker. But it had been there. That, more than the pies or the strange behavior from the neighbors, made me nervous. Because I was starting to like it here, and I didn't trust myself when I started to like things.
Declan's point of view. Torrin didn't like the silence coming from the pack, and it wasn't tension, it was the absence of it. Like everyone was waiting for someone else to act first. I knew that stillness. It was what came before a shift in balance. Juna arrived just after sunset. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. I found her in the lodge's hallway near the back door, leaning against the wall like she hadn't been gone 3 seasons and 2 border disputes. Her coat was torn, her boots tracked mud, and her eyes, amber and cold, fixed on me with the kind of familiarity that grated like old rope. "You let a stray in," she said, voice casual. "She's not pack. She's not human either." I didn't answer. Neither did Torrin. Juna pushed off the wall and started walking slowly through the hall, brushing her fingers along the paneling like she owned the place. She never had, but she liked pretending. Her presence was like a match in a dry room, too volatile to ignore, too small to be the real threat. She wouldn't touch Tessa. Not unless she had permission. But the warning was clear. The pack was drawing lines, and I was standing on the wrong side of them.
Tessa's point of view. I found the door by accident. It was tucked behind the boiler room, down a hallway that didn't look like it belonged in the lodge at all. I'd gone looking for the laundry detergent and gotten lost, which shouldn't have been possible in a house I'd lived in for weeks, but the layout seemed to shift when I wasn't paying attention. The door was heavy, old, the kind that hadn't been opened in years. But it wasn't locked. Inside was a room with stone walls and a dirt floor, shelves lined with tools that didn't belong to modern plumbing. Things made of bone, metal. Symbols scratched into the wood. Not frightening, exactly, but ancient. Familiar in a way I couldn't explain. There were drawings pinned to the wall. Maps of the town, sketches of wolves. Not cartoon wolves, real ones, each labeled in handwriting I didn't recognize. In the center of the room, on a cracked table, was a folded sweatshirt. Mine. I didn't remember leaving it there. My skin prickled, not with fear, but with the realization that I was somewhere I shouldn't be. Somewhere that belonged to him. I closed the door quietly and walked back upstairs, thoughts spinning like leaves in wind I couldn't see.
Declan's point of view. She didn't ask me about the room, but something in her changed after that day. Not fear, not distance, just awareness. The kind that comes when someone sees beneath the floorboards of a house and realizes it's not built on foundation but history. She didn't retreat. She didn't leave. Instead, she started locking her window. Not out of mistrust, out of instinct, and for the first time since she arrived, I began to wonder what would happen if I stopped pretending this was temporary. Because the pack was watching, but so was I. And she was starting to look back. Chapter 7. The Alpha's Choice. Declan's point of view. The wind came from the east that night, sharper, colder, full of something that carried more than temperature. The street felt different. Still, but not settled. Quiet, but not calm. A hush that didn't belong to sleeping houses or low fog, but to the tension before something steps out of the dark and makes a decision you can't take back. I knew they were coming before the scent reached the perimeter. Not the pack. Not ours. Outsiders. Not many. 3. Maybe 4. Rogues didn't move in large numbers unless they were desperate or showing off. And these weren't desperate. I found Gage near the end of the street. He didn't speak, just nodded. The silent kind of acknowledgement that came from years of knowing what a look meant. We didn't have a territory the way the old packs did. Our boundaries were quieter, subtler. But every house on this street, every tree and mailbox knew the rules. And when those rules were tested, it always came down to me. I was already walking back toward the lodge when I smelled her. Tessa, outside again. Alone. In the one place I told her not to be after dark. Of course, it had to be tonight. I caught her scent moving toward the edge of the woods, laced with stubborn determination and something hotter beneath it. Fear she didn't recognize as fear. She wasn't running. Not yet. But her pulse was high and her steps too fast to be casual. My chest tightened. Torrin surged forward without asking permission.
Tessa's point of view. I didn't mean to wander. I'd opened the door for air, and something about the night pulled at me. Not a sound, not a shadow, just a sense. That quiet vibration at the base of the spine when the world shifts and your body knows before your mind catches up. I walked because I didn't want to be afraid of the town anymore. I didn't want to tiptoe around rules I didn't understand, feel the weight of eyes every time I left the porch. I needed to feel like I still had choices, like I could move without permission. But I didn't expect to see anyone. Certainly not the man leaning against the street lamp at the edge of the block, head tilted like he was waiting just for me. I slowed, stopped. He smiled, but it didn't reach anything behind his eyes. His hair was too neat, his clothes too clean, and something about the way he stood made every part of me go still. He spoke, but I didn't hear the words. My body had already begun retreating. Not walking, retreating. Not because of what he said, but because of what my wolf was doing. She was awake. Not just stirring, awake. Furious. "Leave," she said, the voice clear and echoing in a way that made my knees lock. I stepped back. He stepped forward. Then the streetlight above us flickered, and Declan was there.
Declan's point of view. I didn't shift in front, not at first, and I didn't want her to see that version of me, not yet, not like this, but the rogue was already circling and my voice alone wouldn't be enough to push him back. He was testing me. Testing us. Then the pack was watching it, so I let it happen. Bones don't break when we shift, not the way humans think. It's smoother, older, like unfolding into something we were always meant to be. Torrens surged forward, body lengthening, mind sharpening, voice merging with mine until there was no boundary between man and beast. Just instinct. He growled once, low and final. The rogue backed off. They always do if they're smart. But Tessa didn't scream, she didn't even flinch. She stood there, mouth slightly open, eyes wide, not with terror but with recognition. Not of me, but of her. Because in that moment her wolf broke through. I saw it happen. The shift didn't come clean, first time never does, it came in flashes. Skin pulsing with heat, breath shuddering, knees buckling as something beneath her ribs finally stopped waiting and started pushing. I caught her before she hit the ground, and she wasn't fully shifted, not yet, but her eyes had turned, and they were gold.
Tessa's point of view. Everything burned, but not like pain. It was like something had been wrapped around my bones for years, waiting. And now, it had found a tear in the fabric and was clawing its way through. I couldn't breathe. But I wasn't afraid. Because the second Declan shifted, something in me knew. Not from seeing it, not from his size, or the way the rogue vanished the moment his paws hit the ground, but from what happened inside me. A sound, a voice, a sensation I didn't understand until that moment. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. "Let me in." Her name came to me without being told. "Nira!" I didn't shift fully. My body wasn't ready. But my wolf was, and when I looked at Declan, still in his wolf form, eyes silver in the moonlight, I felt something settle. Not romance, not yet. Just the understanding that I had stepped into something ancient, and he'd caught me before I could fall.
Declan's point of view, she didn't cry, didn't panic. Didn't collapse into the kind of shaking mess I'd seen others become the first time their wolf surfaced. She gritted her teeth, dug her hands into the dirt, and rode the burn like she'd done it before. Like it had always been there, just waiting for the right moon. I shifted back beside her, wrapping my coat over her shoulders before she even noticed the cold. She looked at me like she saw everything. Not just the man, not just the alpha, but the part of me I didn't show anyone. The part that stayed in the shadows while the world turned its back. She saw it and she didn't look away. That was the problem. That was the choice. Because she wasn't temporary anymore. And I knew from the way the pack had gone silent again that they knew it too. Chapter 8. One roof, one bond.
Tessa's point of view. The attic felt different after that night. Not colder, not haunted, just quieter, like something had been waiting for me to catch up. And now that I had, it could rest. My senses hadn't stopped humming since the partial shift. I could hear things now, further away. I could feel the edges of other people's footsteps through the floorboards, and I knew which creaks were Declan's before I saw him. The wind outside didn't sound the same. It had layers now, different textures, like it carried messages I hadn't been able to understand before. I didn't try to analyze it. I didn't want to explain it away. I just listened. Nira was with me. Not loud, not demanding, but present, like someone standing just over my shoulder. Not watching, waiting. I didn't ask Declan what came next. He didn't offer. But something between us had shifted. Not suddenly. Not with declarations or long looks across candlelight. It was more like an old house that settled differently in the night, leaning slightly toward another wall. A change you wouldn't notice until you looked up and realized you were standing closer than before. He didn't hover. He didn't speak more than necessary. But his silence was softer now, less like stone, more like shade. He fixed the light in the attic stairwell without being asked. He replaced the door to the back hallway, the one that led to the room I wasn't supposed to find, and left the new one unlocked. One evening, I found a mug on my windowsill. It was my chipped green one, fresh tea, still warm, and a sticky note in his careful handwriting. For the next time you want to leave after dark, ask me first. It didn't say, don't. It said, ask. That was new.
Declan's point of view. The lodge was quieter now. Not because she stopped humming or dragging her chair across the floor like a demon learning to dance. That hadn't changed. But the house had accepted her. I'd felt it the same way I felt a good rainstorm coming, a shift in pressure and presence, and she belonged here, and not just in the way a tenant did. The pack still hadn't spoken to me directly about her, but their distance said enough. They were watching, yes, but not interfering, not pressing. That was their way of telling me the weight of this was mine to carry. If she was truly one of us now, then it would be me they held accountable. I didn't mind, Torin didn't either. He watched her differently now, not just with curiosity or the vague protectiveness he gave to the weaker members of the street. He was attentive, ears always tilted toward her when she moved, as if her footsteps belonged in the same rhythm as ours. I hadn't planned for any of this. I hadn't planned for her. But some part of me had been waiting for her longer than I wanted to admit. And now that she was here, messy, stubborn, completely incapable of folding laundry properly, I didn't want to imagine the house without her. It was a terrifying relief.
Tessa's point of view. The snow came early that year. By the second week of December, the street was blanketed, the trees heavy with frost, and the steps to the porch needed salting every morning. Declan had already fixed the attic radiator again, properly this time, and I'd stopped counting the fines I'd never paid. I came down early one morning to find him clearing the walk, coat open, steam curling from his breath in slow, even clouds. He didn't look up as I approached. He just passed me the second shovel and kept working. We didn't speak for 10 minutes. Then he said, "You don't have to stay, you know." The words hit harder than I expected. I leaned on the shovel, heart skipping once. "I know," I said, "but I want to." He didn't nod. He didn't smile. But something in his shoulders eased. That was the closest thing to permission either of us needed.
Declan's point of view. She didn't need an alpha. She didn't need a guide or a mate or whatever word the old traditions tried to force into mouths that had never asked for them. She needed space, time, a roof that didn't press too hard and a street that didn't keep whispering warnings into her every step. But I wanted her here, and that want didn't feel like a burden anymore. I let her repaint the attic. She chose a shade that looked like mist in the morning, soft and strange. I let her rearrange the furniture, even when it made no sense. I let her hum through the halls and leave her tea mugs on the railing and drag her feet up the stairs. I didn't fine her once, because the house was full now, not crowded, just full. And for the first time in years, it felt alive.
Tessa's point of view. I didn't expect a perfect ending. I didn't want one. What I had was a grumpy alpha who spoke in hardware store logic and protected an entire street like it was the last place on earth worth saving. What I had was a lodge that creaked like it was laughing. A pack that watched with wary acceptance. A wolf inside me who'd stopped pacing. And I had Declan, who still didn't smile often. But when he did, rare, brief, always a little reluctant, it was worth everything. So I stayed. Not because I had nowhere else to go, but because under that roof, in the middle of a town that whispered more than it spoke, with the wolf finally quiet and the cold finally warm, I had found something that didn't need to be explained. I had found home.